Established in the late 1940s and the early 1950s, active duty military personnel at the station worked closely with MIT and other Department of Defense contractors to develop advanced radar systems, computers, and communication infrastructure to create state-of-the-art, at the time, early warning systems. The presentation this evening will be a brief overview of the history of the base and the role it played in national defense throughout the Cold War, why the base was located at Truro, and especially the social history of the military and civilian personnel who worked at the base, and the local civilian population of Truro, Provincetown, and Cape Cod in general. We will conclude with a survey of the reasons why the base was closed and what has happened to it since its closure. Okay, now then, what we'd like to do with the rest of this presentation is basically introduce you to several of the people who worked here and served here in a military capacity at the Air Force Station. So we've made use of interviews that were collected by former members of the Truro Historical Society in 1992. We found cassette recordings that were done in 1992 of veterans describing their experiences. You'll get to hear some of those. So let's begin with this. The Air Force personnel at the station came from across the country, and many were draftees and had never heard of Cape Cod before they arrived. Their travel orders usually involved them taking a bus to North Truro, where they would be dropped off in North Truro at Dutra's Market. Now it's called Salty Market, is that right? Okay. Where they would use a payphone to call the base to get a ride. And the system usually worked well. One notable exception was in 1966, when after making the call, the airman wasn't there when his ride arrived. After an hour, he made another call and another car was sent. The only explanation he could offer why he wasn't there when the first ride arrived was that he couldn't remember what had happened to him. Eventually, he decided that he must have been abducted by aliens. This is explored more thoroughly in an episode of the television show Unsolved Mysteries. It's narrated by Robert Stack, so it must be true. At the very beginning of the base, and concurrently with the development of the radar and communication technology, some airmen were directed to arrive at another location. One of these men, Don Acker, shortly after completing his electronics and radar training in Mississippi, and after just getting married, was ordered to report to a different location. This is his story as he told it in 1992.
About the time I finished electronics school and was accepted into this other school, my mother kept asking me through letters if I was in any kind of trouble, because she said there's been people, FBI people, investigating you.
Security check.
Had no idea. Well, anyhow, when I graduated from ACNW school, within an hour I was in headquarters on our squadron. And he told me that I'm heading for Cambridge, Massachusetts. Here are your orders. You're to speak to no one about it. You're not to report with a uniform. Just go. Here's the address. And the only thing you're to say when you get there is, you must ask for Mr. Krim. So I did. I went into this place. Oh, it smelled so wonderful. It was baked goods, and they were making the Ritz crackers.
From Nabisco.
And she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I'm Donald Ivory. I'd like to see Mr. Krim." Just a minute, please. Just as cool as could be. And before I knew it, gentleman came out with his apron on and a T-shirt and a hat, and the baker business says, "Follow me." And that's all. And we went through the bakery. We went through a storage room, and a couple I thought we'd never get there. And before I know it, we were out there, and he showed us that. He pushed the buttons, they opened up the door, and I walked in, and this man came up to me, and he says, "Welcome to Project Lincoln. I'm Mr. Crow." That room was stuffed with radar. You've never seen anything like it in your life.
They weren't baking biscuits.
It was a cover for Project Lincoln. In that sense.
But most arrivals didn't involve the UFOs or the FBI or secret laboratories and basements. For many, a trip to North Truro was an exciting trip to a very different and unfamiliar location.
Upon finishing radar tech school, this was back in 1953 is when I first came here. I was assigned to North Truro when I was 19 years old. I arrived after Labor Day. They let me off at Dutra's Market. They had to send somebody down to pick me up. In those days after Labor Day, the town closed, I think. It was like the end of the season. The tourists were gone, and I said, what am I getting myself into?
I got here in March and arrived very much the way this fellow did. I arrived at Dutra's store, and he made a phone call out to the base and said, we have somebody here for you to come and pick up. They sent a whole school bus out just to pick me up. And that was my introduction to the base out there. It was a small base. There were only about 200 personnel there when I started there.
Well, I'm a Navy veteran from World War II that entered the Air Force Reserve after I got out. And from there on, lo and behold, guess what? They sent me out to North Truro. And I would arrive there at February 1952, and with about 6 foot of snow, and end up at the market there, and they come and pick me up in a truck and took me out to the North Truro Air Force Station out there and got processed in, and went to work in the power plant there. And I worked there for 25 years. At the end of my reserve time, I applied for the job there because they were turned over to a civilian authority, civilian workers, and I applied for the job and got it. That's the reason why I'm there for 25 years.
But even though I had lived all my life to that point in Massachusetts, I had never really been to Cape Cod, so I wasn't really sure how to get there, where this North Truro was, other than having looked at the map. And had checked around for buses and trains, and the train only ran to Hyannis, I believe, at that time. So I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there, but one day I set off on the adventure to report in August of 1953. I took the train from Haverhill to the North Station, and I was taking a cab over the South Station where I hoped to get some kind of transportation down to Hyannis or something like that. And the cabbie asked me where I was going, and I told him, and he said, well, I think I know a way that you can get there quick and inexpensively. I think we got time. And he stepped on the gas, shot down Atlantic Avenue, and pulled into the dock where the Boston Bell left for Provincetown, and said, hey, you think you still got about 5 minutes? So I ran down, bought a ticket, and got on the Boston Bell and set sail for Provincetown. And when I got to Provincetown, somebody helped me contact the site, and they sent a truck down. And that was more or less a topic of conversation for a good many years as to how I had gotten there. My first overseas assignment right there in Massachusetts went by boat, and no one had quite ever come via the Boston Bell before.
Moving on, once people got there, they lived in, if they were single men or if they were there without their families, so they lived in barracks.
Those days, very few of the people were married, and housing being as it was on the Cape in the 1953, even those that were had difficulty finding suitable housing. But most of us lived in the barracks, most of us single, and it was quite a great camaraderie. And Charlie Buss used to inspect the barracks, and he had one real quirk, that it was said that if he found sand on the front stairs as he entered the barracks, it didn't matter how clean the barracks were, he was going to tear you apart. He had this thing about sand on the front steps of the barracks, which, since we were sitting on a great sand dune anyway, was rather difficult.
Those of us that weren't married, and I wasn't married at the time, lived in the barracks, and the barracks was our home. And we spent an awful lot of time cleaning that barracks. I'm sure they don't look like that now, but they were clean. Believe me, we spent a lot of time doing that.
I was out on TDY for a month, and I had to maintain at the time a room over here at the base. And I came back a month after I had gone out, and was on a Friday night. I hit the AP shack coming through the gate, and the guy says, you got to park the vehicle over there on the side. You're restricted to base for the weekend. And I said, restricted to base for what? He says, well, we had an inspection today, and there was dust on your bed spring. So that's how clean the rooms were.
We were assigned to who was a classic character. Most people who were there back in those times will remember him, Master Sergeant John Wolondek, Air Force Master Sergeant from way back when. Didn't have any family. There's lots of myths about him, but one thing he took great pride in between the mess hall and the old day room and the barracks there in the center of the site was some plush green grass that he had growing there, and he took very big pride in maintaining that site. The worst thing to be caught was to be walking on John's grass. That would usually bring the wrath of John, God, and everybody else down upon you.
For Beaver County Times, this is Off the Record, from radomes to radishes. Welcome to beautiful North Truro Air Force Station, a windswept radar outpost on Cape Cod, where nothing grows but sand, sass, and signal strength. But one fine summer, a landscaping deal promised to turn this gritty base into a garden oasis. Grass galore, straw lovingly laid, fire trucks doubling as sprinklers, and then, ta-da! Green shoots emerged. Only one problem. They were radishes. 5 acres of them. A captain nearly fainted, the commander nearly combusted, and the airmen? They founded a secret club, the North Truro Radish Association. Motto? Radishes, anyone? Eventually the grass came in, but to this day the men remember that one glorious summer when North Truro wasn't just radar ready, it was the radish capital of the world.
But life on the base wasn't always about keeping things nice and clean and organized. There was a lot of entertainment provided on the base.
Life on the air station was quite special. It had a lot of its own facilities, like we had a commissary, a grocery store, and we could get our food without actually having to leave the base. We had a little base exchange or a shop where we had sundry goods and things, clothing and stuff that we could buy. We had a NCO club, basically a bar with small sundry foods, pizzas and that kind of stuff, where we would entertain ourselves. We had a library and a bowling alley where there would be families bowling at night. During the week, there would be small leagues would form amongst the members. And the kids had a bowling league Saturday morning, and they looked forward to that. So there were a lot of entertainment elements right there on the base. One of the most popular things in recreation was the ceramic shop. We had tons of molds, and we would pour slip into the molds, and they would make their own ceramic items. And it was a popular pastime for the wives to go in and, of course, chit-chat while they're doing their craft and painting and firing, and it was very enjoyable. I can remember one time the kiln misfired, and all of the items that were in the kiln to be fired turned into like pottery. It was just melted all together, and the women were so mad that I had ruined all of their works. It wasn't my fault that the cone didn't bend, but I was guilty of firing it, so I was guilty of doing it.
If you're able to live off base in Truro, Wellfleet or Provincetown, that would be preferable. But it came with its own set of challenges.
We got our first shock of reality of what it's like to live in a resort area when we were looking for an apartment. And we were on Commercial Street, and we found this ad, and it had a nice one-bedroom, living room, kitchen apartment. And we were in, and we looked at it, and it looked pretty decent. And we were talking to the woman who owned it, and I had asked, how much is it? And she said, $70. And I looked at her, I said, oh, we can't afford that a month. She said, a month? She said, that's a week. Now that $70 doesn't sound like much now, but believe me.
Corporal didn't make that.
No,
Did you?
I was making...
The Air Force would provide assistance for those who wanted or could live off base, and they would help people find a place to rent.
No, when I came here, we were leasing houses. We had filled up the base housing. We had filled up the 6 houses that the National Seashore supplied to us, and we were very, very hard up for houses. So that's what I did. I'm up and down this Cape looking for houses. So I had about 40 leased houses, government leased houses, for people to come in. And we were very, very lucky because we could usually place a person. There were very few people that didn't get housing within a short period of time.
Memories of Provincetown in the 50s and 60s were frequently mentioned by former base residents.
Beyond North Truro, P-Town was a real cultural shock for many of us young guys. It was a completely a type of activities that were going on there were beyond some of the 19 or 18, 19-year-olds' concept or scope of knowledge. I'll leave it at that. But it was a very interesting town. Used to go down, like you say, maybe hit a couple bars when we were watching the boat come in, go to the one movie that was in town occasionally. But it was definitely an education.
As families on the Cape, we enjoyed the beaches, the local restaurants that opened up in the summertime only, the saltwater taffy stands that would pop up during the summer. We were full-time tourists. We'd run out to Provincetown and tour the gift shops and see the community. We enjoyed the nightlife of the local establishments. So it was, we were really involved in the community, although maybe we were just tourists, long-time tourists, but we were there.
And Provincetown also played a role in the romantic life of base personnel.
Got married on Boston Beach, January 6th. No plan B. Temperature was below freezing. The wind was blowing. The orchid on my wife's bodice froze solid. But my father-in-law was Air Force, so we got to use the Officers Club at the Air Force base for our wedding reception. So everybody drove up there. We had a restaurant from Wellfleet do the local catering. And for entertainment, we had the Provincetown Jug and Marching Band. It was a very small room. We got everybody dancing. And people said it was the most fun they ever had at a wedding.
I can tell you that there were dances and we were all here. And we had more dances than I've ever known. Lots of fun. Those military, when they have fun, they have fun. It was really a great place to come. People from Truro and Provincetown and East End. And I think there was a lot of romance around here.
My second tour here after going to Northern Canada was in 1957. I met my wife and married her, and she's from Provincetown.
In June of 1952, I got married, and we settled. We had a cottage in North Truro for that summer, and then we lived in Provincetown. Rented from the Patrick family there for the next year and a half. My wife had a job with Provincetown Boston Airline with John Van Arsdale. She worked at the reservation desk out at the airline. So things were very good.
But the baseball team at the Air Force Base was very, very important. They played with the Cape Cod League, one of the oldest leagues in the country.
We had our own baseball team, and we played all over the Cape. We played in Chatham and in Harwich, and played teams, and we were only a pickup team, and they were more professional than we were.
That year, 1952, they developed a baseball team out there. We had a team called the North Truro Blue Sox, and we were invited to play in the Cape League. So I was in seventh heaven. There I was at a base, a nice little base like this, brand new, and able to play baseball in the same league that I'd been playing at and before I entered the Air Force against some of my old teammates here. We did very well during those years. We had some very good players. We even had some personnel from the Army base at Camp Wellfleet that played on the team too.
So there was a lot of social mingling between the local residents and the base residents on the base itself.
At the NCO club, they used to have weekly bingo, and the town people would come and play bingo, and we would load up the NCO club so they could play.
Because those boys did get into trouble. In fact, I remember one of them. You probably always remember about the streaking that went on. Well, it would never go on at North Truro, I'm sure of that. But we had bingo out here on every Wednesday night, and all the lovely Provincetown women came, and we sat up there in front, and we played bingo like we were never going to lose. but we never did win either. So all of a sudden someone said, ooh, and we looked up and there's one of the GIs, airmen, streaking across the stage. And we looked up and she said, oh, is that all? And so
The base was also very active in local charities and would sponsor events to benefit local residents.
I remember the NCO club had fish fry, benefit fish fries, remember?
Yeah.
And that money went to help Truro residents and the Boy Scouts and the other organizations.
The Air Force Sergeant Association ran a charity program called the AFSA Fish Fry and Auction. And they called it AFSA Christmas. And in the summertime, we members of the squadron would go out to the various businesses and shops, and we would ask for donations like a dinner for two or a weekend stay or a handbag or some sort of trinket, a piece of jewelry. And then we would, with a certificate, would bring it back to the Air Force Sergeant Association group, and we would tag it and mark it for auction. And then in the fall, working through the local fishermen at Provincetown, we would ask them to donate fish, which they always did, and we would have codfish fish fry with hush puppies and French fries. And we would hold in October, I think, a fish fry and auction. And during that time, we would raise all these funds for the AFSA Christmas program. Many families couldn't be housed at Truro. We had a limited amount of housing. And those families that couldn't get into housing, the National Seashore had some excess housing in Eastham available. And so they loaned those houses out to members of our squadron. The wives worked at local businesses, and banks and etc. The kids went to the Eastham town schools and then on to the Nauset school system. So there was so much community involvement because we actually lived in the middle of the community.
When I first started teaching here, there were 3 school buses that brought the kids, and one was to the base. There were about 200, more than 200 kids at the school. We had a lot of base kids.
it was wonderful for the people of Truro to have us here at North Truro. They contributed quite a bit of money to the schools and labor, because I was always getting somebody a job in North Truro, especially during the summer months.
My family rented a house in Wellfleet. I was part of the Cub Scout program as a committee chairman. I remember we had a bike rodeo out at the pier in Wellfleet, and we had the kids practicing safety and demonstrate their skills at the rodeo. It was an enjoyable event.
A lot of programs out here for children. We had a wonderful, wonderful Halloween time out here. It was the best I've ever seen, and by now it was the scariest I've ever seen.
One of the things I did in Wellfleet was I coached T-ball, and I can remember some of the precious moments of coaching T-ball where you would send someone out to left field and they would be chasing butterflies because it was so boring out there. Nothing ever got hit out there. Or the kid at second base who brought his Matchbox cars and was driving over the base, putting dirt ramps so the car could go up and over. And it was just so enjoyable to be part of that growing experience that they were all having.
So earlier I mentioned the Texas Towers. These were platforms with radar domes mounted on them that were located over 100 miles off the coast of the Cape on George's Bank. The North Truro base supported Texas Tower number 2, which had its own particular and dangerous challenges for those who served on them. Ronald Gustafson, now 92 years old, shares his experience of serving on Texas Tower number 2.
I think it was February of 1954 that I went there. So that was the early stages of the base. When they first started Sage, they sent me to a school there for 3 weeks. And I stayed at my uncle's cabins at P-Town. I have 2 cousins that left, two Ainsworths, In fact, my middle name is Ainsworth. Yeah, see, they didn't have family housing when I was there. And they didn't have the bowling alley. All these things Dawn told me about. They didn't have that one. It was just a basic site. I went out by chopper on my first trip, and probably about half my trips were chopper and half of them by boat. That was often on the boat. And the weather had to be decent, so a lot of times we just roamed around the tower waiting for the weather to calm down enough to get off the boat. The waves were unbelievable. We had regular windows up in the radar tower. And when I was working, I'd look out those windows and look at the sea. And it was horrendous sometimes. We lost 4 people just before I went out from the crane failure. 4 people went down in the donut when they never found them. The seas just took them away. We worked about 12-hour shifts. And like in radar maintenance where I was, if something happened to the radar, everybody just congregated in the tower. But there was only 4 or 5 of us on the tower at a time. But yeah, we lived in the dining hall when we weren't working. Played cards, mostly pinochle, Monopoly, things like that. Oh, the tropo antennas. We couldn't get TV on Tower 2. We were too far out. We tried everything. We put TV antennas, mounted them to the tropo antennas, TVs anywhere, all kinds of gadgets, but would only get just very basic symbols of TV. So it wasn't watchable. We walked in, and then there were bunk beds behind that and nothing else. There was no tables or anything. The rooms were just used for sleeping. Personal belongings, you didn't have room. I became a barber. We didn't have a barber, and I tried it, and I did fairly well. I got so good at it that they started getting haircuts just before they went to shore. We had a room that we called a lounge where we had up to 2 beers a day, hung around there like a regular bar. The important thing is I had a close friend out there who could barely sleep. It bothered him so bad being out there that he had a terrible time sleeping. There was 2 people that wore life jackets most of the time, which wouldn't have done any good, but they wore life jackets. So it did have very emotional effects on a lot of people.
So, conclusion. Basically, why is there no Truro Air Force Station? Why did it close? Essentially, it was because of the end of the Cold War. Several things happened. In the middle of the 80s, the Northern Truro Air Force Station closed because of several important developments. First of all, attack from bombers was discounted. The more likelihood of attack by missiles, either intercontinental missiles or submarine-launched missiles, were the more likely target. You didn't need radar pickup airplane anymore from the Truro location. Also, in 1989, we were all ramping up for this, the Soviet Union fell. And so consequently, the enemy that we were looking out for was no longer a strategic threat. The Air Force Station was transferred to the National Seashore in 1994. The Highland Center was established in 1996. The Payamet Performing Arts Center, I believe, was established in 1998 and has done very, very well. There's a sustainable farming initiative that is still going. But nothing was ever really decided on how to make use of the existing buildings and infrastructure. So consequently, in 2023 and 2024, most of the buildings were razed.
Everything was good about the base. I can't think of anything bad about it. The personnel there were good to work with. The base itself was good. It had everything you needed.
And we had about 20 of us radar operators were sent to Santa Monica, California to train on the new computer system. And we got back, the commander told us we were all frozen. So I cheered, yay, yay, yay. I get to stay in North Truro.
But you always had a little bit of Truro in your heart.
Well, that was it. We loved it. Absolutely loved it. Came back twice in our married life with the children, and they loved it. And then we came back to retire.
And I was very proud to be a part of this organization. I guess it became my home. I was here 15 years. We grew to love it, and we bought a home here. And I went to work for North Truro Air Force Station in 1963 as commander, secretary. And I served under about 8 commanders.
I believe that this provided a career for me, and I'm very glad that it has, because really enjoyed being out there, and there was a wonderful bunch of people out there that you've got to know just about everybody out there. Although it was a short time, the reserve time. I was only there for February to November when I got out. During that time, I really enjoyed myself.
Thinking back, it was all very purposeful. It was a professional atmosphere. It was everybody dedicated, a real belief that we truly were protecting the country against the menace that somebody was going to kick off World War III. It was probably, over the years, one of the more satisfying jobs, because looking back, it was one where I really felt as if I was accomplishing something. It was a real job, so to speak, that had a purpose.
And it's a shame what's happened to it since it's closed, because all those facilities, they've come up with some wonderful ideas of how to use them, and yet it's just sitting there all these years unused. And those facilities, unless they get a little love and care, they're not going to be worth anything.
And I sure enjoyed being out here and working with all those blue suiters. When my husband died, they closed the base, and for them to come to the funeral. I looked around, it was a rainy day, I turned around and looked, and all the blue suiters behind me, they all came. And I thought it was so wonderful.
Thinking back on this period in the early 50s, kind of nostalgia that kind of went away. I felt like I was there at a high point, and then to have seen kind of the decay, and then to finally read that North Truro has kind of passed off into history, and that I've been asked to contribute to some of the history is kind of sobering.